I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about the 5 ways of thinking according to Aristotle. Living substances have forms different from the forms of non-living substances, and Aristotle considers this form of living substances to be soul. For him, all living beings have souls. Living beings are capable or have the potencies of maintaining, preserving, and reproducing themselves. These potencies must then be the potencies of the soul. The soul is the bearer of active and passive potencies that enable living beings to survive and flourish. However, souls of different classes of living beings have different powers. Aristotle develops his account in De Anima by examining the powers of plants, animals, and human beings, which result in a cumulative hierarchy of the vegetative, animal or appetitive or sensitive, and the rational soul. Plants survive by converting inorganic matter into organic matter as their nutrition. They reproduce and can self-maintain by repairing damaged tissue. Aristotle considers these powers as the powers of a vegetative soul. Animals also have the powers of the vegetative soul, the powers to metabolize food, reproduce, and self-maintain. But in addition, they have the powers of perception, desire, and locomotion. These additional powers are the powers of an animal soul. Human beings, in addition to the powers of the vegetative and animal soul, have the power to understand their perceptions, to distinguish between good and bad, and to prefer the good. The power to understand, Aristotle calls the theoretical part of human rationality, while the moral power is the practical part. These two parts belong only to the rational soul. So a human being has the powers of the vegetative, animal, and rational soul. Each soul, while it contains the powers of the various types of soul, is unified in that single soul. The 3 types of soul are a hierarchy, with the powers of the higher souls superior to the powers of the lower souls, though they do not always control them. Human beings, through their rational powers, have control over their movement, which is a power of the animal soul, but not over certain powers of the vegetative soul, such as metabolism. The idea is that the superior powers should ideally govern the inferior ones, for instance, for rational powers to control our animal desires. Moreover, this ability is not automatic but requires effort. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle elaborates a virtue ethics, where human beings must acquire virtues in order to establish the order of the soul proper to rational beings, so that there is a proper cooperation between the different parts and powers of the human soul. This is the metaphysical basis of his ethics. The rational part of the human soul is called the intellect. The powers of the intellect are very different from the other powers of the soul. It is immaterial and not tied to bodily parts. Sense perception provides thought with content. Such thought is the thought of immediate sense perception or of sense perception mediated through other thoughts. Each of our senses has their proper object, such as visual perception through the eyes and audio perception through the ears. Some objects are perceived through multiple senses, such as the image of fire through the eyes and the heat of that same fire through the skin. However, our senses are limited. The heat of the fire cannot be seen through the eyes, and the image of fire cannot be felt through the skin. We do not see sound or hear color. The intellect, by contrast, has no proper objects. As a universal power of cognition, it is able to grasp everything. The senses are also limited in terms of the intensity of the sense perceptions. If the light is too dim or too bright, we will be unable to see objects. Our senses may even be damaged if the intensity is too high. The intellect does not have these difficulties. It is not damaged by objects that are too easy or hard and can still cognize them. The senses perceive the accidental properties of their objects, but the intellect has the ability to go beyond the superficial to cognize the essence of the object. Even if the sense organs are damaged, the intellect is not damaged. Aristotle believes this to be the case even when the brain is damaged, though cooperation between perception and thought may be adversely affected, since he thinks the brain is where the different sensory inputs are coordinated. The capacity to think nonetheless remains. Hence, he thinks that the intellect is immortal and somehow divine. This seems incongruent since the soul is a unity, meaning that the vegetative and animal powers are as needed as the intellective ones. If the vegetative and animal parts of the soul are mortal, the soul as a whole must be mortal. Averroes will later argue that the intellect is not a proper power of the human soul, but the essence of God, which we participate in passively, though there is no consensus on this. Regardless of the intellect's mortality, because the intellect is immaterial, not tied to matter the way other parts and powers of the soul are, free will is tenable. Material objects are caught up in causal structures. Nutrition, perception, and desire are involuntary. We cannot willfully control our metabolism. Though we can close our eyes, we cannot control what is seen when they are open. We cannot prevent desires from arising within us, though we can decide whether to act on them. Precisely because we can control our actions and behavior, we seem to exert our will freely and as agents. Aristotle explains that this freedom of the will comes from a twofold freedom of the intellect. The theoretical intellect is free from the limitations of our senses. This allows us to grasp reality as it is and not just as it appears to us, because we can know the essence of things, explains Henning Technē. Our thinking transcends the information that the senses provide towards essence. Secondly, the practical intellect is free from the limitations of our desires and feelings. Desires and feelings come from our sensuous nature connected to bodily functions. They drive us in certain directions, but we have the ability to consider them rationally and control their expression. Hence, there is a contingency in human behavior. We are not determined and we have agency because of our intellect, according to Aristotle. The vegetative soul and animal soul are non-rational, while the rational soul, which is exclusive to human beings, is rational. In Book 6 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle focuses on the rational soul. It is composed of two parts, one part that contemplates the necessary and one part that contemplates the contingent. The necessary part of our rationality deals with the scientific, while the contingent part calculates or deliberates. For Aristotle, the act of deliberation is akin to calculation, to analyzing what should be done. According to him, we only deliberate over what is contingent because there is no point to deliberating over what is necessary, since there is no decision point that can change the necessity of the necessary. For instance, we may deliberate over what to eat for breakfast, be it cereal or toast. There is no necessity in nature that compels us to only be able to have one or the other. The breakfast event is contingent, whereas if we release a ball from our downturned hand, it necessarily falls if there are no immediate obstructions. We do not decide if it should or should not fall. We can only decide if we should open our hand to drop the ball. That is the contingent part. But once we decided, say, to open our hand, we do not further deliberate or decide if the ball should fall. It will fall necessarily due to the natural force of gravity. It is not to say that we cannot inquire into the falling of the ball or the nature of gravity. We can, and according to Aristotle, we use the necessary or scientific part of our rational soul to make that investigation. As for whether we should open our hand, we use the contingent part of our rational soul to calculate or deliberate what we should do. Note that both necessary and contingent parts belong to the rational soul. Both use reason. Our soul, as mentioned, has various powers belonging to its various parts. To drive action, we use the powers of sense perception, intellect, and longing. By action, Aristotle is not referring to mere motion but intentional acts. Hence to him, while animals have sense perception and longings, since they possess an animal soul, which is also known as the appetitive or sensitive soul, because they lack a rational soul which only accrues to human beings, they do not act, since in not having a rational soul, they lack its powers of intellection that gives the capacity to form intentions. In the case of human beings, our senses perceive an object which may arouse in us a longing or repulsion, after which we deliberate using our powers of reason if we should give in to this longing or repulsion, out of which a choice is then made. If both the deliberation or reasoning and longing are correct and aligned, then we decide to act and act. Practical thinking is well done when truth is in agreement with the correct longing, adds Aristotle. For instance, I perceive a tasty pie, and since I like pies, I long for it. However, I reason that pies have many calories, and that it is healthier to avoid foods with many calories. My longing and reasoning are both correct, but are misaligned. I may then decide to not take it and turn my body away from it. Say instead of a pie, it is a fruit that I perceive. I like fruits, and so I long for it, and my reasoning tells me that fruits are full of vitamins and fiber, and it is healthy to eat. My longing and reasoning are both correct and also aligned. I decide to eat it, and hence reach out my hand to take it and open my mouth to eat it. This practical thinking, which Aristotle also refers to as moral thinking, is concerned with action, in contrast to contemplative or theoretical thinking, which is not concerned with action or the making of anything. Instead, thinking well consists in thinking what is true, and thinking poorly in thinking what is false. Hence, using my previous examples, my theoretical thinking of how pies have many calories and fruits have vitamins and fiber are true, and hence I have thought well. If, however, I had thought that pies have few calories or that fruits have no vitamins, that is poor thinking, since the thought is incorrect. Yet, despite my correct reasoning that it may be imprudent, I may still choose to eat the pie. After all, human beings are not slaves to reason, correct or otherwise. Aristotle tells us of another factor, which is character. To be able to choose requires both an ability to reason and character. Acts are executions of choices. Animals are, according to Aristotle, excluded from the notion of action because they lack the ability to reason. Human beings are able to act because we have the ability to reason through our choices, which lead to our acts, which may or may not be in accordance to what our reason tells us. Character comes into play also. Both the parts of the rational soul, one dealing with the necessary and one dealing with the contingent, seek truth, but the way they do so differs. Aristotle explains that there are 5 and only 5 ways the soul can attain truth. 1. Techne or art. 2. Epistēmē or science. 3. Phronesis or prudence. 4. Sophia or wisdom. And 5. Nous or intellect. He also calls these ways virtues, since their proper end is towards the good. Virtue is the best characteristic of a thing in relation to the work belonging to it. Hence, the virtues or best characteristics of the rational soul in relation to its work which is taught are these 5. There are other characteristics such as deception, viciousness, hate, etc., but these are not virtuous, since they are not towards good. The reason why I present both the Greek and its English translation by Robert C. Bartlett and Susan D. Collins, who are the translators of my version of the Nicomachean Ethics, is that the Greek words do not quite translate. They do not quite correspond not because of poor translation, but because the meanings of the English words are not how they are understood today. Art today mostly refers to the fine arts, drama, dance, theatre, music, and literature. But Technē includes those, but more importantly also objects of artifice, meaning man-made objects including technical objects. Aristotle's prime example of art in Book 6 is of medicine, which product is health. Similarly, science today mostly refers to the natural sciences such as physics, chemistry, and biology, and at most also the social sciences, such as economics. But episteme is referring to knowledge of the necessary type, epitomized by mathematics and also the natural sciences. The knowledge of episteme is what necessarily must be and hence is eternal, in the sense that they can never come into being or perish, but has always been the case, even if human beings do not know them. Aristotle thinks that episteme can be transmitted by teaching. These teaching can be in the form of syllogisms, meaning through logical demonstration, for instance in Euclidean geometry, or by induction, meaning showing the student particulars of what is universally true. For instance, a ball, a pen, and a book falls when dropped, and from there making the inductive leap to the universal truth that all material things fall when dropped. Episteme or science, according to Aristotle, deals with what can be demonstrated, by which he means proved. Making things, or poiesis, and actions, or praxis, are both contingent, corresponding to Techne and Phronesis respectively. While both are types of activities, Aristotle distinguishes between them. Making things is a Techne, or art, in the sense that it creates something that is artificial. Artificial being something man-made that would not be in nature if not for the craftsmanship of human beings. The origin, the cause of an artifact, is its human creator. Things that exist necessarily or naturally do not involve art, their origin or cause attributable to nature or themselves. Art, or Techne, is concerned with making something using our reason. Its aim is an artifact. If we do end up making an artifact but through false reasoning, it is then artless. Hence, it is not just making an artifact, but employing our capacity to reason while making it, which, following Aristotle's thinking, will render a better artifact, which is what makes Techne a virtue. Phronesis or prudence is sometimes translated as practical wisdom, such as by Richard Perry, who authors the article Episteme and Techne in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Phronesis is concerned with action or praxis and not with an end product like with Techne. A prudent action is what a prudent person would do. He would deliberate nobly about things good and advantageous for himself, not in a partial way, for example, the sorts of things conducive to health or to strength, but about the sorts of things conducive to living well in general. For instance, our pie and fruit eater above will be prudent if he does occasionally enjoy himself by eating a pie, but just not too often. If he hates fruits, but forces himself to eat them all the time for health reasons, and because of that becomes embittered with his life, that is not being prudent. Prudence is a holistic attitude for one's entire life. Aristotle, in addition, believes that it is one's skilled deliberation about matters that gives rise to a person's prudence. Prudence is, however, neither science nor art, neither episteme nor Techne, which is why Aristotle gives it its own category of Phronesis. It is not a science, since its resultant actions are contingent. It is not an art, since one has not made an artifact with one's prudent actions. Instead, Aristotle writes, prudence is a true characteristic that is bound up with action, accompanied by reason and concerned with things good and bad for a human being. For of making, the end is something other than the making itself, whereas of action, there would not be any other end. Acting well itself is an end. Note that Aristotle does not define prudence or phronesis with regards to good outcomes. It is not an ethics of consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism. What is good and right in utilitarianism is what gives good and right outcomes. Good is not what is morally good, but just what delivers the most utility or happiness. If doing what is morally bad delivers the most utility, then that is what a good action will be according to utilitarianism. What Aristotle teaches in Nicomachean Ethics is virtue ethics, where one nurtures virtues in order to be a virtuous person. Whether such a virtuous person becomes rich, successful, admired, or with whatever desirable outcomes is not relevant. What is more important in virtue ethics is that a person acts virtuously, regardless of how things turn out subsequently. He cites skilled household managers and politicians as two sorts of prudent people, skilled being the skill of being virtuous. The virtuous politician may end up losing an election. The virtuous household manager may not become as rich as a vicious household manager, but to Aristotle, the virtuous way to stand on principle, or arche, is nonetheless still the right way to act. He laments, "For the principles of action are that end for the sake of which the actions are undertaken, but to someone who has been ruined on account of pleasure or pain, the principle immediately fails to appear. It is not manifest to him that he ought to choose all things and to act for the sake of this and on account of it." While prudence relies on reason, it also requires rectitude of the appetitive faculty, according to Thomas Aquinas' commentary, which advocates self-control. Prudence needs to know the universal, but since it is about action on particulars, it is not just knowledge or epistēmē that is needed, but also experience, the kind of experience that comes with age. How can we know the underlying principles by which science bases its demonstration? These arches can come neither from science itself, since science relies on them to demonstrate, they themselves being indemonstrable, nor can it come from art or prudence, since those are about the contingent. It also cannot come from wisdom, since it belongs to the wise person to have a demonstration about some things. Hence, it must be intellect or nous, which tells us the principles. But before moving to nous, his last way of attaining truth for the rational soul, Aristotle talks about wisdom. Wisdom is not just reserved for epistēmē, but also Technē. One can be wise in the arts. He tells us about capable sculptors whom he calls wise because they have a virtue belonging to an art, though his interest is on generally wise people and not just people who have virtues of wisdom only partially or in specific ways. He writes, "The wise person ought not only to know what proceeds from the principles, but also to attain the truth about the principles. Wisdom as a result will be intellect and science, a science of the most honorable matters that has, as it were, its capstone, science and intellectual grasp of the things most honorable by nature." Aristotle explains the relation between prudence and wisdom. Wisdom is not concerned with what makes us happy, while prudence is. Yet prudence is not just about having knowledge, but taking the right actions based on the knowledge. But to take the right action depends not only on knowledge, but also character, to have the right virtues so as to then act correctly. It may not even depend on knowledge at all, since the prudent person can just accept the authority of a prudent person in following which actions to take. For instance, to be healthy, we do not have to know all about nutrition and medicine ourselves, but can take the advice of those who do know nutrition and medicine and direct ourselves accordingly. While neither wisdom nor prudence produce artefacts, they do produce happiness through having them. They are both virtues, and when actions are taken towards ends in accordance with wisdom, they will also be prudent actions. Virtue makes the target correct, prudence the things conducive to that target, adds Aristotle. Yet, it is not a matter of taking right actions that makes a person virtuous. Some act in the correct way because they have been ordered to do so, without even knowing they are acting correctly. This then is not acting virtuously. Aristotle raises another capacity, cleverness. A clever person does what is conducive to the target posited. However, targets can be noble or ignoble. Prudence alone, virtue alone, does not assure the achievement of one's goals. Virtue is accompanied by correct reason. Prudence has correct reason as one of its two components, the other being character. Hence, one cannot be virtuous without being also prudent, and conversely, one cannot be prudent without also being virtuous. All the virtues will be present when the one virtue, prudence, is present, writes Aristotle. To decide correctly requires virtue and prudence, since it is virtue and prudence that informs what is correct. Virtue tells us what our goal should be, while prudence tells us what means or actions should be taken towards this goal. Prudence acts for the sake of wisdom but does not control wisdom. Up to this point, the chapters within Book 6 are quite distinctly about each virtue of the rational soul. Aristotle has covered the first four virtues, mentioning the fifth, Nous, in passing as a prelude to Sophia, and then shifting gears to deliberation, comprehension, and judgment. We should note that what we have of Aristotle's works are not his writings intended for publication, which have been entirely lost, but are lecture notes from his students, and so might not flow as well as a polished work. In any case, in discussing deliberation, comprehension, and judgment, he seems to be talking about how the intellect or Nous works. We use our reasoning abilities to investigate and also to deliberate. Deliberating is a kind of investigation, according to Aristotle. To deliberate is to investigate and calculate. It is not merely guessing, since guessing is not accompanied by reasoning, and is swift while deliberation takes time. They ought to do swiftly what has been deliberated about. They ought to deliberate slowly, expands Aristotle. We should take our time to deliberate, but once we have figured things out, we should act quickly. To deliberate well is to deliberate correctly. To deliberate correctly is not just to land on the right or good result, since that can happen by chance after deliberating wrongly. For instance, I could have figured wrongly that my train comes at 12 when it was scheduled to come at 11:30. But by chance, that train was late that day and came at 12, and so I was none the wiser. While good deliberation typically takes time, just because we deliberate for a long time does not mean that we did it correctly either. To be correct accords with what is beneficial and aims at what one ought in the right manner and at the right time. It guides us towards our objective. Whether these objectives are appropriate or good has to do with prudence, and so deliberation is related to prudence. Comprehension is the outcome of deliberating over things that perplex us. Since those things perplex us, they require deliberating over. If there is no perplexity, no deliberating would have been needed. It is hence similar to learning. Comprehension differs from judgment, which is correct when we judge fairly or equitably. Fairness has to do with morality, while comprehension is about knowledge acquisition. Judgment, comprehension, prudence, and intellect are concerned with particulars to the extent that they guide our actions, since action is directed at particular things. Intellect works with both universals and particulars. Pertaining to the demonstrations required by science, it grasps the defining boundaries or limits of scientific theories. Pertaining to action, it grasps the particular thing in its contingency. It is from the particular that we can abstract to the universal principles which can then guide our actions. Aristotle suggests that the development of the intellect towards proper judgment takes time, and hence comes with experience or age. In conclusion, the five virtues of the rational soul, Techne, Episteme, Phronesis, Sophia, and Nous, can be viewed as five ways of thinking. They relate to one another, and each is required for us to live well, which also explains why they are virtues, since virtue is directed towards the good life. Reason underscores all five virtues. Episteme is concerned with universal necessary truths, which are discovered through the deliberation by Nous, which investigates contingent particulars and then abstract them into generalisations. These investigations require reason. Techne is the use of reason towards creating artefacts, be they works of art or products. Phronesis is the use of reason and virtue towards good actions. Sophia is to grasp the underlying arches governing epistēmē, Technē, and Phronesis. For Aristotle, wisdom is a marriage of intellect and science to obtain the most fundamental principles. Nous is what we use to investigate to find out what these arches are. These arches are not just for epistēmē, but also for virtue. Virtue is what tells us what our suitable goals may be, and Phronesis tells us how to act towards those goals. Said another way, virtue and reason are both foundational to the rational soul, underscoring the 5 ways of thinking. Knowledge is knowledge of both the necessary and the contingent. Knowledge of the necessary is epistēmē, while knowledge of the contingent resides both in Technē, which is the knowledge to make things, and Phronesis, which is knowledge to act in a virtuous way. Wisdom is knowledge of the arches that is the basis of all other knowledge. Nous is the apparatus that makes such discovery possible through deliberation. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.